Senator, we know that there are documents that exist that could either prove or disprove what John Bolton is alleging. Why would you not want to see them?
Well, and we, will maybe see them. Who knows at this point? It's a question.
To see them? Why wouldn't you want to see them?
If any of the information that comes out further, I think clearly when we were in our own conference today at lunch, we're going to cross that bridge when we get to it on Thursday or Friday. And I think every senator will have a different opinion. You heard a little bit of that today in lunch.
Do you want to see them?
Go ahead.
What I saw today was really a strong discussion of the role of the Constitution and the role of impeachment in the country, and what happens when impeachment becomes partisan and when impeachment is used as a political weapon. What we also heard after that discussion was the fact that the president has a right and a responsibility to fight corruption, especially when it involves taxpayer money, and how he has continued to do that as any president should. On Friday, standing here, I said, hey, there's going to be new revelations every day, and there certainly was one in the New York Times released last night, and the paper tomorrow. Tomorrow, I don't know what we're going to see, but there'll be something new as people are out there trying to inflame emotions and influence decisions that are being made. So you see information leaked from a book that, to me, it's nothing new than charges that have been made by other people already. The voting is starting in Iowa in a week. The Democrats are trying to remove the president from the ballot. I go home to Wyoming, I talk to people, they say, let the voters make that decision.
Aren't the documents a way to take the partisanship out?
What John Bolton said, that the president told him not to release the funds until Ukraine investigated Biden, is nothing new?
There is nothing new that the House could not have looked into prior to this.
Said it, Senator.
Well, and there is no new information, in my opinion, based on what John Bolton has known. But today, in an effort to generate interest in a book, they have selectively released information that, to me, doesn't go beyond what we have seen in the 17 witnesses who've already testified. And that's why I'm saying there's not new information out there. So we're going to have a vote on witnesses on Friday. We're going to have an opportunity.
I'll take a little different stance on, there is the idea of new information, and I don't think we're going to avoid it. It's just that we have not really addressed it. We know we got to cross that threshold come Thursday or Friday, and whether that's going to weigh in or not remains to be seen. But sure,
Isn't that the way to take the partisanship out of it? Just look at the documents.
And we may arrive at that.
There is no way. Well, there's no way to take the partisanship out of this.
Doubt.
The day that Donald Trump was elected president of the United States, Democrats said we're going to impeach him.
Right.
A month before Donald Trump took the oath of office, Elizabeth Warren and Dick Durbin had a press conference outlining a number of things which were impossible to accomplish, which said, okay, then we're going to impeach him. The day he was sworn into office, the Washington Post had a headline 1 minute after he took the oath.
And Ken Starr pointed that out as the most dangerous thing that could
So
happen.
there is no way to take the partisanship out of this.
You faulted the House for not going through with this. You faulted the House for not going through.
They could have called all of these witnesses, and they chose not to.
As a senator, taking stock of all the facts in the case, shouldn't you do everything you can to try to get the information about everything that's out there before deciding how to vote?
As a senator, we have a responsibility, when you look to the Constitution, to not allow this to become a circus, which is what the Democrats are trying to do, but to judge the case that is brought to us. You read the Federalist Papers, see what the founders had to say. The responsibility of the Senate is to judge the case brought to us by the House, and it is a weak case, it is a flimsy case. It is a case that they said had to be made immediately, but yet they held for 33 days in another political stunt. So my job is to view what the House has sent us and make a decision based on that.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So, to wrap it up, we're going to get back to the order here. Now, before I leave, yes, I'll let Chuck get in. So, on the issue of what we just learned, nobody is dodging that. We're going to clearly cover it, and there's going to be robust conversation. It'll be Thursday or Friday, and then we'll see what happens. I think what they did this afternoon, laid out how this case has been made in a way that we don't want to set a precedent in the future, regardless of the merits of the case that we're trying to litigate and get straight currently. Thank you.
And I thank Mr. Braun for his courtesy. I want to make a few points here. First, once again, the president's lawyers keep making the case for witnesses and documents. What was the number one fact that Ken Starr emphasized? We are a court. Who ever heard of a court proceeding without witnesses and documents? Who ever heard of a trial without witnesses and documents? If we are a court, all the more reason we have to hear the evidence. Second, Mr. Sekulow said when he listed his 5 points, not a single witness said they heard from POTUS himself. We want Bolton. We want Mulvaney. They heard from the president himself. We can solve Mr. Sekulow's problem of not having witnesses who heard from the president himself by having Bolton, by having Mulvaney, by having Blair, and by having Duffy and the documents underneath underneath what they said. Third, the idea that the House can do oversight, which is also what Mr. Starr said. That's their way to keep a president in line. As you have heard, no president has ever blocked oversight, has blocked any kinds of congressional inquiries more than this president. And finally, if the founding fathers said you would have wait for elections unless a crime is committed, they wouldn't have listed high crimes and misdemeanors. In fact, every constitutional expert, including those at the time like Mason, including Hamilton, including all of the experts who have followed up, have said you don't need a crime to unseat the president for high crimes and misdemeanors. So I don't think they made a very strong case at all. They continue to avoid the facts. Let us hear from, I'd like Mr. Propera, when he's mentioning the president's document, you don't hear the word Biden, you don't hear the word CrowdStrike. Those are in the document. Why? It's obvious. It's obvious. Because the president was asking for a quid pro quo. Take a few questions, but only a few, but we can't have everyone yell, so I'm going to have to identify you.
Senator,
yes.
Thank you. Hallie from NBC. You say you want Bolton. You obviously cannot do it alone. Do you believe that the book manuscript revelations that have come out are enough to get Republicans over the line? Is this a game changer?
Look, it's a little bit in this sense like Watergate. Every week, new evidence comes out that is further condemning of the president. And so, obviously, the revelations in the New York Times about the Bolton book strengthen the case for witnesses, for documents, even more. Each few days, something comes out, and the average American is saying, why don't they want witnesses and documents? And, you can sit and listen to all these arguments, but one question looms overhead. If the president did nothing wrong, why is he so afraid of having witnesses and having documents? Mr. Manu.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Should the House subpoena either the manuscript
That's going to be up to
or
them.
Bolton?
That's going to be up to them.
What's your
I'm not
preference?
giving them advice. Yes, sir.
What's your response to Ken Starr warning that this is a new age of impeachment?
Well, look, the bottom line is very simple. If the president does something that is an abuse of power, and if the president then stonewalls Congress into investigating it, then impeachment is the only remedy left to Congress other than elections. And in this case, since it involves trying to jaundice our elections, trying to distort our elections, elections is not the remedy.
Senator.
Yes.
Some constitutional scholars are now arguing that Justice Roberts can demand a subpoena of Bolton, of Mulvaney, if House managers request it. Is that a discussion right
Well,
now?
we had an amendment put in by Senator Van Holland, which simply said require him to rule, not changing the rules of the Senate, which the House could overrule him. Our Republican friends are afraid of any independent analysis, whether it's from witnesses, documents, and they don't even want the Chief Justice to opine. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate it.
Is John joining us? I think you saw this afternoon, Mr. Starr made the case for just how high the standard is if you're going to go down this road and remove a president from office less than 10 months before the next election. And again, I think Mr. Papura was great in laying out the facts that we've said so many times will not change, have not changed, will never change, regardless of what the New York Times may report about some anonymous source telling them what the draft manuscript of Mr. Bolton's book supposedly says. The last thing I'll say is, and then we'll let a few others speak, but the last thing I'll say is, if they go down this witness road, and I don't think they should, but if they do, you've got to go all the way to the end. You got to go all the way to the end, in my judgment, and that would mean the whistleblower, the individual who started this whole thing, the anonymous whistleblower with no firsthand knowledge, bias against the president, who worked with Joe Biden. Seems to me if you're going to go down this road, you got to go all the way and make sure that individual comes in, raises his right hand under oath, swears to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help him God, and face questioning about how this whole thing happened. Again, I hope that's not where we're going. I don't think that's the case. But if we do, that seems to me that it shouldn't be that Adam Schiff is the only person in the country, out of 330 million people, the only person in the country who knows the identity of the person who started the whole darn thing. So again, if we're going to go there, I think you got to go all the way, and the whistleblower should be part of any witness team. I'll yield to the gentleman from New York.
It's also really important to point out, Adam Schiff never issued a subpoena for John Bolton. Now, Judge Leon was hearing a case on a subpoena for Charles Kupperman and chose to have an expedited schedule to consider the Kupperman subpoena. There was an executive branch and legislative branch conflict on subpoenas during the impeachment inquiry. And Judge Leon decided to have an expedited schedule to consider that. And how did Adam Schiff respond to that expedited schedule? He lost interest. He withdrew the subpoena, and he issued a motion to dismiss. Now that means that in a December-January timeframe, that conflict would have potentially been resolved. But the timeline that was most important for the Democrats and Adam Schiff was to impeach the president by Christmas. And here was the other problem. Judge Leon may not have ruled in favor of the Democrats. Now, how do you impeach the President of the United States for obstruction of Congress right after Judge Leon rules in favor of the president in the Kupperman subpoena case? But remember this as we listen to the news over the course of today. Adam Schiff was in charge of this process for months as the prosecutor, the judge, the jury, the witness coach, and so much more. And he at no point issued a subpoena to hear from John Bolton.
The other thing you have to remember through all of this is that the importance of what Ken Starr presented this morning cannot be overstated. He explained that this age of impeachment that we've now entered is not what the framers of the Constitution intended. In fact, it's exactly what they feared. It is a threat to our constitutional order. And when we weaponize impeachment, as he explained, we've opened a Pandora's box for the country. It's something we're all deeply concerned about. We'll take a few questions.
Sir,
I have a question. Are any of you just a little curious at least about what Bolton himself has to say?
Look, I'll give you a narrow answer to your narrow question. This is another page out of the playbook of the Democrats. It looks just like the Kavanaugh hearing and so many things that we've seen before.
Would any of you even have any curiosity about asking Bolton himself? When you gave me an answer like that, I think it was kind of...
Listen, there's a lot of ideas, there's a lot of presumption, there's a lot of assumption. We've seen that all through the process. That will not change. Trying to answer your question. That will not change the underlying facts. The important facts that are at issue that you just saw reiterated and that you'll see again today are the operative facts of this case. That's what the Senate has to look at. And we're not concerned about that at all.
Congressman, you don't think that Ken Starr is the right messenger for this when he talks about the age of impeachment being here? You're hinging a lot of your arguments on what he had to say today. Is he the right person to make that case?
I think Professor Starr is an excellent person to present that. I think he did a fantastic job, and he is echoing and explaining what the framers of the Constitution intended. There's a reason that the impeachment clause has been so rarely used up till now in our history, because it was intended to be a rare, almost kind of nuclear option. They listed treason, bribery, and high crimes and misdemeanors. You don't have any of that here. They haven't even alleged a crime. Wait, and that's the reason, that is the reason that we're all so concerned. If abuse of power, the amorphous term abuse of power that the founders used to call maladministration, if that is now the standard, the bar for impeachment is so low that we should be concerned about every future president. Anytime a president has a majority party that's opposing him in the House of Representatives, the base is going to cry out for an impeachment, because the Democrats have set the bar now so low that anything we disagree with on policy, a phone call, or anything else now becomes the standard. These are troubled waters for the country, and that's what Ken Starr is explaining. I think you'll hear more of that from Professor Dershowitz, and it's a very, very important point that we cannot lose sight of.
On process, we know there are a lot of grievances. There have been from the beginning. But what is the precedent, not just in the Senate, history of impeachments, but really in all of history of American jurisprudence, for having a trial without witnesses?
Look,
this will be the first one.
Right. In the previous two impeachments, you only have two precedents for this. You have Andrew Johnson and you have Bill Clinton.
Not just presidential, like all impeachments.
Well, but a presidential, wait a minute, a presidential impeachment is a different standard. It's a unique animal, and we only have two examples to look at. And in both, in fact, including with Nixon, who never got to this stage, in the three examples of impeachment, you had criminal acts that were clearly committed, and there were mountains of evidence that everyone agreed and saw. That's why they were not single-party impeachments. We have gone down a road that we have never entered before, and it's a dangerous one, as we've explained. This is the first time you had a single-party impeachment. Go ahead,
let me jump in on that. If you want to talk about how cases would work, the prosecution decided that they were ready for trial. They declared that their evidence was uncontested, it was indisputable, it was overwhelming, and that they proved their case in the House beyond a doubt. They showed up on the first day of trial and spent 11 hours saying over and over and over again all the different ways that they don't yet have the ability to prove their case. That was on them to decide, to declare that their evidence was overwhelming, uncontested, indisputable, and that they had already prove their case beyond a doubt. Two, is that Adam Schiff and the House impeachment managers keep making statements of facts not in evidence. If this was a trial, you know how many different ways the House impeachment managers would have been reprimanded so far over the course of what was over 21 hours? Or what about the evidence that they are relying on if the federal rules of evidence applied? How much that they are bringing over here that wouldn't actually get admitted into a court. But the thing is, on the first day of impeachment, they show up and they outline point by point by point by point all of the ways that they said in their words that they can't prove their case. That's on them.
You keep saying trial in the House. Doesn't the Senate have the...
arguing that this evidence should just be ignored then? Do you not want the Senate to even...
I'm answering the question about if this was a real trial. And if this was a real trial, every single time that the House impeachment, I'll give you, we've heard these great examples from Michael Purport, and he keeps finishing it by saying, why didn't they tell us that? When Jason Crow stood before the Senate and said that Mark Sandy asked, why is there a hold on aid? And he didn't get an answer. Mark Sandy from OMB. Why didn't Jason Crow finish that statement by saying he did get an answer? And the answer that OMB's Mark Sandy received was that the president was concerned about other countries paying their fair share.
Only after the whistleblower report.
Listen, I appreciate it. Adam Schiff has you here by proxy, NBC.
No,
that's fantastic.
That is a fact that only happened after the whistleblower report.
But listen, NBC, if you just go back to what Jason Crow said, he made a statement on the Senate floor. He chose to say that when he asked why there was a hold on aid, that he never received an answer. That's factually untrue. Now, if we want to just change, questions and diversions because, you want to hold the water of Adam Schiff and the House impeachment managers, I appreciate that. But to answer the question,
sir, that you're omitting.
Congressman, why do you keep quoting the quote-unquote trial in the House? Why do you should have been investigation.
Okay,
That's the Senate. Excuse me, let me finish my question. That's the Senate with the power to try and impeach. It's the sole power. Why do you keep referring to a House trial?
Why, isn't it strange, if that's the case, why aren't the House impeachment managers asking to call why aren't they asking to call Bill Taylor? Why aren't they asking to call Gordon Sondland? Why aren't they, no, I'm sorry. If to the point that was just asking the question just before you, and let me answer. You're saying that this is the trial. Let me answer it. Let me answer it. If you're saying that what's happening upstairs is the Senate trial, and what happened in the House was something else, why? Let me answer it, please. I appreciate it. You asked your question, I'm going to give the answer. Now, in Adam Schiff's words, he said that his closed-door depositions were, quote, analogous to a grand jury investigation. He said the closed-door depositions, that was the phase that was, quote, analogous to a grand jury testimony. Now, in that grand jury testimony, he was, imagine this for a grand jury in the United States if we want to draw equivalencies. He was the prosecutor, the judge, the jury, and the witness coach. You know how he ruled in anyone's objection with regards to absolutely anything during closed-door depositions? 100% of the time he ruled in his own favor. Now, going back to the original part as far as the Senate piece being a trial, how telling is it to you if that was the case? And if this is the trial where it's supposed to be just like any other trial, that any witness that was called on the House side that they don't want to hear their testimony, if to your point, if that's what's going on right now, isn't it amazing that they're saying then that they don't want to hear from Gordon Sondland or Bill Taylor or Fiona Hill or Lieutenant Colonel Vindman? I'll tell you what, it'd be great if we could just hear from, Kurt Volker and Tim Morrison, but guess what? We did already during open Intelligence Committee hearings, which, by the way, they don't want to call these people. You know who wasn't present during all that testimony and all of the questions? Any of the President's counsel was not even allowed in the room to be able to cross-examine any of those witnesses at all. They were banned. So, and if you want to carry it even further, putting that aside, again, as I pointed out already, there is a lot that wouldn't be admissible if the federal rules of evidence applied. It wouldn't be admissible if you can't make statements of facts that are not in evidence, so on and so forth.
Do you think that Bolton is
Congressman, I have a question for you.
Do you think John Bolton is credible?
With regards to an anonymous sources in, via the New York Times.
So you think
is wrong?
Look, let me follow up on the question here before we get to the question of witnesses about what happened. You keep asking, isn't the trial supposed to occur in the Senate? Yes, it is. And the trial is supposed to occur on the House's record. And the House said very clearly, according to the precedent of the United States, that every time we have, are you gonna ask questions or are you gonna answer questions? So in the House, what we heard was, this is overwhelming, it's indisputable, and we can't wait one more day. You don't need to hear from a single witness because this is impeachable. You have everything you need. We stood on the floor and said, if we have everything we need to impeach a president, why down the hall 100 yards are the United States senators already saying, we'll need more witnesses and evidence in that trial? Now you're all in here saying, let's talk about a witness related to an unpublished manuscript. You haven't asked me any questions about an actual transcript. There's a 179-page transcript of an actual witness named Michael Atkinson, who's the Inspector General of the Intelligence Community of the United States. He's the only witness in this whose testimony hasn't been turned over. His is testimony that we should have heard by now. You're cherry-picking witnesses. I want to hear from all of the witnesses. I wanted to do that over in the House. We wanted a complete process. Adam Schiff decided what witnesses we would hear from, what witnesses we wouldn't hear from. And the minute it became clear that he had met with the whistleblower after he publicly said that he didn't, he immediately changed his tune and said, the whistleblower's testimony is no longer necessary. He ruled that he was not a fact witness, that his staff was not a fact witness, that the whistleblower was not a fact witness. He has cherry-picked this all the way. He had the opportunity to do a fulsome investigation in the House, and he blew it. He dumped this garbage on the Senate's doorstep and is asking them to do the job we should have done in the House, we could have done in the House. we didn't do in the House because the most conflicted member of the House of Representatives, the only one out of 435 that is a fact witness, that the Inspector General says in his transcript is a fact witness, is the one leading this investigation, the person that got to make every single decision. That's why we are watching the thinnest, weakest impeachment in U.S. history unraveling and getting thinner and weaker every time we hear from witnesses and the testimony that's being played. Thanks.
So that's why you want to hear from Bolton. You want to hear from Bolton? Mr. Raju asked you.
Will you hear from Bolton? Why won't you hear from Bolton?
So this is the app.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
It's called Otter.
O-T-T-E-R?
Like the animal.
Thank you. I was watching that. I was like, that's amazing.
Yeah, it helps a lot.
Hey, strange. Yeah.